So once again, a very good afternoon and welcome to this brief overview on launch vehicles for space exploration. So I want to start off with a small quotation about space. That is, space is the empty place next to the full place where we live. I believe we will be true to our nature and go there. This quotation pretty sums up the spirit of humanity to explore unknown areas. So that is how we have gained knowledge about various lands, oceans, seas across the earth, and space was another frontier to explore, and it was in man's true nature to explore, and that's why we have been building launch vehicles, a spacecraft to go farther and farther and learn the secrets of the universe. So I don't know who has quoted this, but this quotation pretty sums up our true spirit of exploration. So this, by now, all would know that a space program is an essential part of any nation. India has started its space program as an enabler for the development of society, as a tool for national development. That is why we have a host of applications for crop forecasting in agriculture, mining, communication, broadcasting, disaster management, navigation. And the one other tile that you see here is space for science and exploration. So that is the domain that we will be focusing here. That will be the perspective for the launch vehicles that I'm going to explain here, which is mostly required for the science part and the exploration part. So we'll have a bit of history, a bit of the present, and some of the future. So this is how I have structured the presentation. So let us start off with a little history. You know that rocketry is a 1,000-year technology. So the earliest references to this are available in Chinese manuscripts, and it is widely believed that rockets originated in China. Then this was, and from there it was proliferated to other regions in Eurasia. And Tipu Sultan and Hyder Ali used these rockets for warfare and successfully. And from where a military engineer called William Congreve, after the defeat of Tipu Sultan, he took these rockets. Around 100 rockets were transported to Britain to study and perfect that technology. And English used it successfully in their military campaigns against France, America, and these rockets gave them a very distinct advantage in their military pursuits. So ultimately, this slowly that died down in the 19th century until it was taken up once again by certain space enthusiasts as a means for space travel. So you will definitely be recognizing these faces here who are considered the pioneers of modern rocketry, starting with Tsiolkovsky, who used to dream a lot. He was a Russian school teacher. He used to dream about space travel, write stories about space travel that inspired a generation of people in his age, and that triggered them into forming rocket societies and launching of small rockets. And that is how this technology slowly started building. So you know, Tsiolkovsky was famous for the rocket equation that is still today considered as the basic equation for rocketry. Then almost concurrently, Goddard and Oberth, Goddard in USA and Oberth in USA, worked out these technologies. Goddard had a lot of access to investments, because of which he could go ahead and build a working model of a rocket. And Oberth, if he had, though he was not successful in making a working model because he did not have access to the kind of funds that Goddard had in the US. But nevertheless, he is also considered as a pioneer because he too had the same ideas and similar knowledge, built similar knowledge in rocketry. Of course, The V2 rocket is considered the mother of all rockets that are flying today. And after the World War II, Von Braun was taken to the United States, and his team was taken to the United States, from where he built bigger and better versions of V2. Similarly, concurrently, there was a person called Sergei Korolev, who is credited with the advancement of Russian launch vehicles. So these were the people who are considered the pioneers of modern rocketry. Then, as you would have observed, if you have read the history of rocketry, the Cold War was had really accelerated rocket technology and space exploration, because at the height of the Cold War, a lot of money and resources were put in by both Russia or Soviet Union at that time and USA, and towards a competition to see who would land a probe in the moon first, who would land on the moon first. So all these objectives arising out of the Cold War resulted in a rapid development of rocketry and space exploration and spacecraft until US landed on the moon first. So after that, there was a period of lull, and then again it started in the 1980s. So we have to credit the Cold War to some extent for the rapid development of launch vehicles. So these were the first orbital launches undertaken by the various countries. The France and UK, though they had their first orbital launches, they did not follow it up further, and finally it was the other countries that took up and continued their launch programs. So you can this table is self-explanatory, so I am going to the next slide. So now what all of you need to understand is, the world over, the launch vehicles were an offshoot or an evolution from the intercontinental ballistic missiles that were also part of the Cold War development. So you can see the missiles graduated to become launch vehicles, then satellites, then applications. So this was the approach taken by leading spacefaring nations. Whereas India adopted a reversed timeline approach. That is, we wanted to use space technology for societal development thanks to the vision of Dr. Vikram Sarabhai. So we came up with applications first, demonstrated those applications, then we started building satellites to make those applications possible. Then we built launch vehicles to launch these satellites to space, starting with the experimental launch vehicles, then from there on to the polar satellite launch vehicles, geosynchronous satellite launch vehicles, and so forth. So this was the Indian approach. So now let us look at the world leaders in space, how they came up with their launch vehicle evolution. So if you take Russia or USSR, the UR-500 Super ICBM is what graduated to become the Proton launch vehicle, which was their workhorse launch vehicle until recently. Because we don't see, because of the Russians and war and other geopolitical issues there, we are not seeing many launches from the Russian side other than that to the space station. So the Proton is, even though it is considered to be retired after the development of another launch vehicle called Angara, but you have to understand that Proton was derived from a super intercontinental ballistic missile called UR-500. Similarly, there was another ICBM called R-7, which became the launch vehicle for Yuri Gagarin to make the first space flight in 1957. So this R-7 slowly evolved to the Soyuz launcher that we see today, and that has been relentlessly transporting humans to the space station. So this Soyuz, it is considered as one of the most reliable launch vehicles and is still in operation. Similarly, there were other missiles like Dnipro, Rocket, Cosmos. These are all missile-derived launch vehicles, but all of them have now become inactive. And Roscosmos is the space agency under which these space programs are undertaken in Russia. So now, today, you can see Russia has graduated to a modular family of launch vehicles called Angara. So instead of having different families of launch vehicles, what they did was they built what is called a universal rocket motor stage, and using that, they can as a module. They built a family of rockets, out of which only two variants have flown so far. It is Angara 1.2 and A5, and this will replace the earlier launch vehicle families. And they have also announced future launch vehicles like Soyuz 5 and NEC super heavy lift, but we don't know because of the war and other considerations how that development will pan out. Then what you need to understand that they had a very a launcher called Energia, which is considered to be one of the most powerful rockets, which was also carrying Buran, which is a space shuttle. And again, after the split up of the Soviet Union, these programs were abandoned, but their propulsion systems are still being used as variants for the new family of rockets, which is the Angara rockets. And there is, to the left, you can see what is known as an N1 rocket, which was considered to be Soviet Union's answer to the powerful Saturn V rocket to be used for space exploration, but that never became successful. After four flights, all of which failed, they stopped flying N1. That program was abandoned. So this is about Russia. So this slide, United States of America, you can see starting from the Juno 1 rocket, how their various missiles were used as launch vehicles up to the Saturn V rocket, which took man to the moon in 1969. So you can see that, for example, if you consider their initial manned flights like the Mercury program, Gemini program, it was using the Atlas missile converted to a launch vehicle. Similarly, the Gemini program used the Titan ICBM converted to a launch vehicle. And finally, it was again Werner von Braun and his team who designed the Saturn family of rockets, and Saturn V is still today considered as one of the most powerful rockets. It's Leo was more than 140 tons to Leo, and today, even in the latest age, we have not built a rocket with that kind of a payload capability. That is what SpaceX is trying to do now. But this was done long back in 1969. After which that program did not proceed. Once they conquered the landing on the moon, then then gradually those space activities tapered down, and the focus was more on the space shuttle. So this is the kind of family of rockets that the United States of America came up with. Minotaur is again a launcher derived from a missile. Then they had the very reliable Delta family of rockets and the Atlas family of rockets, which are all now retired and stopped, but they have played a very important role in space exploration and building of the space station. So these were considered as workhorse launch vehicles during that time. Similarly, you know about space shuttle. Then ultimately in 2011 it was retired because of the high cost of refurbishment. It could not reach the level of reusability that USA thought it would. Then we have the Pegasus air-launched rocket. It is only used sparingly for it's an all-solid rocket, sparingly for some military payloads or so. Then they came up with an Ares program, which was ultimately cancelled because of cost overruns and schedule overruns. So if you look at the future launch vehicles that USA started building, one is the Space Launch System. It is mostly based on the heritage systems that went into the space shuttle. But then there is some uncertainty about the program if you look at the recent news. But the Space Launch System is more a government-driven program, a NASA-driven program, which will carry about 130 tons to Leo, and is considered as the main launch vehicle for the upcoming lunar exploration program from the USA, Artemis. Now, recently, the United Launch Alliance, consisting of Boeing and Lockheed Martin, they came up with the Vulcan Centaur rocket, which had a successful flight last year. So using a LOX methane engine developed by the private sector, developed by Blue Origin, which is a company started by the Amazon founder Jeff Bezos. So using that engine, they came up with this Vulcan Centaur rocket, and this is considered to be the replacement for the Delta and Atlas family of launch vehicles, which was retired. Then there was a proposal for an Omega launcher, again based on older technologies, but that has been shelved. So this is, if you look at from the space exploration point of view, there is the Artemis program, and which is going back to the moon by 2026, setting up a gateway, setting up research laboratories, habitation on the moon. So they have clearly defined a program, and they are also getting other countries to participate in this program. And now initially space launch system was supposed to be the launch vehicle that is going to make this possible, but now USA is looking at a more active private sector participation in this program, and we'll be seeing a lot of SpaceX launches, Falcon launches for carrying the spacecraft, launching the spacecraft towards the lunar, and also even private sector lunar landers on in the future towards this program. Now, if you look at Europe, as all of you know, Ariane was their workhorse, or rather is their workhorse launcher. And you can see this is the kind of evolution. They came up with Ariane 5, which was retired last year, and the next variant, Ariane 6, has come up, which had a successful flight again last year, and that is going to be their launcher. At any time, if you have watched Europe's space program, at any time you will see that Europe maintains only one launcher, that is the Ariane launcher, and once they go to the next launcher, they will retire the previous launcher. So if you Ariane, so now as on today, Ariane 6 is the operational launcher, and similarly there will be another launcher in the PSLV kind of category for polar missions, and that is the Vega launcher. Then they started Soyuz 2 launches also in collaboration with Russia to launch from their launch site in French Guiana. But then due to geopolitical reasons, that has been suspended. So this is what I was telling. Now, as of now, they have Ariane 6, which is again modular in nature, where they can have single satellite launches or dual satellite launches, and the Vega C launcher, which will use the solid strap-ons as their booster stages, as Vega C's booster stage. So this will give some amount of cost effectiveness, so that these solid boosters, they are bringing in some commonality between these two launch vehicles for some cost effectiveness. And one other development is now the Ariane 6 is also relying on older heritage propulsion systems, but now they are developing a LOX methane engine called Prometheus, which will eventually replace the propulsion systems that are being used in Ariane 6 today. So China has a big family of launch vehicles, Long March family. So I'll not go into the details. It's all self-explanatory. This is just compiled for your convenience. So it is very difficult to, from their numbering, which goes to, to identify that. But generally the Long March 2 family is something equivalent to our PSLV, and one of that LM2F is a human rated launch, is a launch family, and then their heaviest launcher is LM5, and they are again looking at other heavier and heavy lift, super heavy lift launching. So all these are derived from the Chinese ballistic missile, the Dongfeng 3, DF3 and DF5 are considered to be the precursor missiles for these launch vehicles. So the future, if you see, it is again partially, they are having a very active space vision or space exploration mission. 2050 they have released, and they are aggressively building launch vehicles, reusable launch vehicles, super heavy lift launch vehicles, and they have announced LM9, which is a super fully reusable super heavy lift launch vehicle with a payload capability of around 150 tons. Then they have some small satellite launch vehicles also, some of which are then are done in the private sector. Then they have their own space station, China space station, and and they are actively looking at some participation from Russia and Europe. So this is one. Yeah, next comes Japan. Now Japan had a family of rockets called Mu series. In that, if you look at the last one, the M5 series, the M5 series was the launch vehicle that launched the Hayabusa mission, which is which is the first asteroid sample return mission. Okay. Then they had the heavy lifters, namely the H2 and the H2A and H2B, which was also taking the cargo transfers to the International Space Station. Then now they have come up with H3, which is supposed to be a cost-effective launcher compared to the previous family. So that is expected to be replace the H2 family. Then they also have a all-solid Epsilon launch vehicle, which they are using for, which they have been sparingly launching. So today, if you look at private space flight, it is, as all of you know, SpaceX has now slowly become a household name everywhere. So with their Falcon series of launch vehicles, they have demonstrated tremendous technological feats like capturing the booster back or launching it on a floating barge, recovering the booster stage on a floating barge. Then so they have been trying from one step to another step with some partial support, reusing the launch pads that were being used for the previous generation of launch vehicles. So they have a lot of announced lunar exploration as well as Mars exploration, and they are building the more heavy lift launch vehicles to make those visions possible. So similarly, there is another launch vehicle called Antares, which is mostly used. Again, it was built in the private sector, but it has been used for cargo missions to the International Space Station. So these are the launch vehicles which are getting ready, most of which may become workhorses for space exploration. One is the Starship. Recently, also they are slowly getting there in spite of several failures. But when it becomes operational, it is expected to have even a capacity of around 100 people as a fully reusable launch vehicle. New Glenn had a very recent flight. Neutron is again in a company called Rocket Lab. They are building, which is the next step from Electron, on again by Rocket Lab. Then there is another company called Terran One, which is building the world's first, or rather, they have already built the first 3D printed rocket, but they could not achieve a successful development flight. So they have gone ahead and started to the next step without demonstrating successful development flight. But the company is very much there and trying for a successful development flight for the next generation. That too realized through 3D printing. So these are the various space capsules for manned missions, and these are all tuned to the specific launch vehicles. They are designed either to be compatible to Atlas vehicle or the Falcon vehicle. And now space exploration and human transport to low Earth orbit is slowly getting mainstream. And this has been enabled by the workhorse launch vehicles that we see today. So these are the various workhorse launch vehicles that we were speaking about. The Atlas 5, Falcon 9, Falcon Heavy, H2A, Long March 5, which has some heritage. Then we have the human rated launchers. Space Shuttle, of course, is retired. Then the Soyuz LM-2F, Falcon 9, again carrying the Dragon capsule. Then the upcoming HLV M3 this year, we may be having the first successful flight for uncrewed mission we are planning in this year. Then which is a human rated version of our LVM3 launch vehicle. Then Atlas 5 has already demonstrated the launch with the Boeing Starliner. Then the Space Launch System is still under development. So already one mission has happened. So we are looking forward to other successive missions. But then, is it possible for doing space exploration with small satellite launchers? Because space exploration is considered a very expensive enterprise. So, but now we are seeing a lot of space exploration also happening with CubeSats. So recently a capstone mission, which is a CubeSat mission to the lunar, to as a technology enabler for building a navigation system for the moon. So this CubeSat mission used the Electron small satellite launch vehicle from Rocket Labs for launching this to the moon orbit. So this is something very novel that they have done. For that, they have used what is called a photon kick stage, which is there in the upper stage of the electron, that will convey or give the necessary delta V for the capstone spacecraft to move towards the moon. So this again used a lot of something like several facing orbits, and this photon kick stage will convey it to the translunar injection orbit, and midway it will get separated, after which it will be captured by the moon. So it is not just the heavy lifters, even the small satellite launchers can also be utilized for space exploration. So that is the message. So if you look at the launch pattern in the last 5 years, it has been increasing tremendously. So you can see from 2020 with the 114 launches per year, it has now become 263 launches. So this is a very big increase in the last 5 years. And you can see that the satellites for space exploration, it is in the range of 30 to 35 satellites per year are launched for dedicated to space exploration. Yeah. So now if we look at Indian launch vehicles and how they are being used for space exploration. So if you look at India, we launched a rocket from its soil in the 6th year of the space age. So 1957 is considered as the dawn of the space age. So in 1963, we launched the first sounding rocket from Indian soil. So from then on, it has been a steady and continuous evaluation towards new capabilities and self-reliance. And we have graduated from zero infrastructure to a Atmanirbhar self-reliant space infrastructure. So if you look at India's history, because we had a magnetic equator going through Tumba in Trivandrum, this was considered as the ideal place for originating the space program. We put a launch site there. Dr. Vikram Sarabhai enabled the international science community to come and launch payloads from sounding rockets there. From then on, we have been building sounding rockets, and from there we have graduated to heavier rockets. So we can say that upper atmospheric research has really led to a full-fledged space program that we are seeing today. So if we look at the evolution of our launch vehicles, so from sounding rockets, SLV-3 and augmented satellite launch vehicle, we were building the capabilities for space transportation. So this was the experimental phase where we learned assembly and integration of the rocket stages, then mission planning, control. From then on, we moved on to the operational phase where we had PSLV, GSLV, and LVM3. So all of they are all household names. It's all well known. So I don't have to explain all of them here, because you have been following this the launches of ISRO for all these years. So these three have been our defining symbols of our space program. So recently we have operationalized the small satellite launch vehicle SSLV, but this is more for the small satellites launch market, and we expect industry to take over this SSLV for capturing the global market for launch services market for small satellites. So if we just to give an idea about the complexity of a launch vehicle, we can see there are several systems in a launch vehicles which we need to master before we go ahead and launch the launch vehicles. So we have the aerodynamic systems, materials, propulsion structures, avionics. Then we have to master the vehicle checkout, the integration, then the filling of these hazardous liquid propellants, then ground systems for tracking the vehicle during the launch. So this is a subsystem view of a launch vehicle for just for you to understand the complexity. So each of the subsystems have to be developed by experts, qualified, and then after several steps of reviews and testing, they get inducted into the launch vehicle. So these are the various propulsion systems which I am not going to elaborate, but these have been the workhorse engines for both our launch vehicles and spacecraft. And I understand you have a presentation which is focused on advanced propulsion. So I will not elaborate here. So, but we have also have a self-reliant infrastructure for propulsion systems testing at both the Sriharikota as well as Mahendragiri. So you can see the high altitude test facilities to see to test for the ignition and operation of engines in under vacuum conditions. Then the tests for cryogenic engine test facilities. Then future propulsion system test facilities. So all these have been built painstakingly over several decades. Today we have a world-class infrastructure to build and operate launch vehicles. So now I just want to touch upon certain space exploration missions which you already know, but how did we innovatively use our launch vehicles for our space exploration missions? So, as all of you know, Chandrayaan-1 was our first major space exploration mission. So at that time, we did not have the powerful launch vehicles that other countries had, like USA. So our mission specialists came up with a design, a slightly improved variant of the PSLV vehicle called the PSLV XL. Till that time, PSLV had what is called a generic version. So and another version called the core alone version without the strap-ons. But then they increased the redesigned the PSLV vehicle with heavier strap-ons to arrive at a mission design for successfully launching the Chandrayaan-1 spacecraft to the moon. And all of you know that this is the Chandrayaan-1 is credited with the discovery of water on the moon. So they came up with an idea. Instead of directly injecting into the translunar orbit, they came up with this gradual burns and finally taking it to the moon. So this mission, this was a novel way in which our launch vehicle, even though a launch vehicle where PSLV was actually designed to launch polar Earth observation satellites, but it has been used for a variety of purposes. PSLV has allowed us to go to the moon and Mars, and also launched the Astrosat as well as the Aditya L1 missions. So PSLV, when we designed, nobody thought that PSLV will be used for such a versatile mission scenarios. Similarly, the Mars orbiter mission also, you would have all followed that. Again, we used a similar concept, but of course, we optimized the payloads within the payload capability that can be done within this mission scenario. But all of you know that this has clearly demonstrated India's resolve and capability to undertake space exploration missions with the current capabilities. Similarly, you know, the Chandrayaan-3 mission, a mission that one can never forget because it was a exciting moment, not only in India but across the world. So you had the Chandrayaan-3, we had LVM-3. Actually, the very first mission of LVM-3 was used for Chandrayaan-2, though we could not successfully land on that mission. But subsequently, LVM-3 M4, the fourth operational flight of LVM-3, could achieve that target and successfully injected the Chandrayaan-3 spacecraft, and from where it traveled all the way to the moon, and we had the exciting moment of landing on the moon on that day. So this is the entire mission profile which we have captured in a slide. So starting from the launch to the landing. So now this is the space vision that has been outlined by our Honorable Prime Minister in 2023. So we know that again the LVM-3 launch vehicle has enabled us to uh, to to think about human space flight. So we have undertaken a major program called the Gaganyaan program, by which the existing LVM-3 launch vehicle is being human rated, and the systems are given an additional layer of safety through various tests, redundancies, and a crew escape system. So in 2019 the Gaganyaan program was approved by the government, and recently last year a number of follow-on missions to those Gaganyaan, leading to the Bharatiya Antariksha Space Station, and followed by a target of the first Indian crewed landing on the moon by 2040. So this, but again, there is, if you have to achieve the first Indian crewed landing by 2040, we need a more powerful launch vehicle, for which the next generation launch vehicle based on locksmith propulsion was defined, and that is the NGLV, which can take around 30 tons to LEO, and it will be also have a reusable lower stage. So this is, and in order to reach there, we need a series of space exploration missions, a series of Chandrayaan missions. So already Chandrayaan 4 and Chandrayaan 5 have been defined. So beyond that, a lot of other lunar exploration missions will be required to study how our crewed landing, where the exact site, the conditions, and prepare ourselves for the first Indian crewed landing on the moon. So for that, we feel the human rated version of LVM-3 as well as the next generation launch vehicle NGLV will become the workhorse, and even a scaled up version of the next generation launch vehicle will have to be designed if we have to transport multiple crew to the lunar surface and back. So with this message, I would like to end the presentation, and that is, every generation has the obligation to free people's minds to look at new worlds, to look out from a higher plateau than the last generation. So that is why we are building better and better launch vehicles for the next generation to improve upon and also continue exploring new worlds.